Okay, today we're going to be learning Megillah Daf Hey. Today's daf is sponsored by Yomi and Adam Furziger in honor of the engagement of their daughter Avital, a former student of mine, to Seki Becker. Mazal Tov. Okay, we're going to get started on our daf at the very top. Amal Rav. Megillah Bizmana. There's a sheet for today with some charts and things that will also help organize. Amal Rav. Megillah Bizmana korino ta'afilu biyachid. Shelo Bizmana ba'asara. Megillah, when it's done in its proper time, one reads it even as an individual. If it's the regular day where everybody's reading the Megillah, if you're stuck and you can't go to shul for some reason, you can read it by yourself. Shelo bizmana, but if it's not the proper time, now there's a big debate about what exactly he's referring to here. Some people think he's referring to what we saw in the Mishnah. If you're reading it on Yud Al, you bet you Gimel. If you're from the village and you read it on an earlier day, then the only way you could do it is B'tzibur, because there's not going to be on Purim itself, there's Persumei Nisa just because it's Purim. But there's no, right, Persumei Nisa is to publicize the miracle. So that usually you need a big crowd. But if it's not a day, so if it's a day where there's Persumei Nisa anyway, then it's okay. You can do it on an individual basis because Persumei Nisa is going on all around you. But if it's only that the villagers are doing it on an earlier day, then you have to do it in 10 people. Big question, what does 10 people mean, by the way, right? Does 10 people mean 10 men? Does it mean 10 women? Does it mean 10 people who are obligated? Maybe you have people who aren't obligated in the mitzvah. Maybe they don't count. So the Rama writes that he says, the Rama is the commentary of the kind of the Ashkenazi comments on the Shulchan Aruch. The Rama writes, he says there's a debate about whether women count or not, okay? And there's different opinions about it. The Torah actually says no, but some of the commentaries on the Torah say that maybe there is reason to include women, because again, once you say what we saw yesterday, then women should theoretically count as a sarah, and therefore tzibur of women could count as a tzibur of women here. Okay, so there's a big debate about this issue. So again, Rav says, if you're reading in its proper time, you can read it on an individual basis. But if it's not in its proper time, then you need 10 people. Rav Asi amar bein bizmana, bein shelo bizmana ba'asara. Whether it's its proper time or whether it's not its proper time, you have to do it with a minyan. Or again, asara, 10 people. I shouldn't say a minyan, 10 people. Hava uvda, right? This is a good question in general. When we say 10 people, depending on what the situation is the 10 people always necessarily our classic definition, right? Again, that's assuming you go by the classic definition, which is another whole question. But if you go by the classic Orthodox definition, the 10 people is men, then the question is, where do you is that in every situation that you need 10, or does it depend on the situation? It's Persumei Nisa, and people who are part of the Nes are just as equally part of the Nes, should just as equally be part of this 10, right? Again, I'm not getting into the whole question in general about minyan and women and that, which was a whole separate question. Okay, so now, Hava Uvda v'chash le Rav lahad Rav Asi. Even though Rav said that Megillah shelo bizmana, when it's not read in its proper time, by the way, some people think, what does it mean not read in its proper time? If your Dalet falls or Tevav, right? Nowadays, it will only be Tevav, but then it could have been your Dalet, depending on, when they didn't have a set calendar. So if your Dalet were to fall on Shabbat, and then you'd have to read the Megillah on Friday, so maybe that's what he's referring to, that it's no longer in its proper time, and then you might need a minyan. If the whole reason, it's a little bit hard, that explanation, and each explanation is difficult. If you say he's talking about the Yud Aleph, Yud Bet, Yud Gimel of the villagers, they didn't do that in his time anymore. And if you say he's talking about when it was Shabbat and you had to put it on Friday, the whole logic of this wouldn't make sense, because the whole idea was that it wasn't Persumei Nisa. On that day, because not everybody's doing it. On that day, everybody's doing it because nobody's doing it on Shabbat. Everybody's doing it that day. Why would you specifically need a minyan then is also unclear. So there's a bunch of things in today's daf that sometimes you have to learn to live with the lack of clarity. Okay, it's one thing we're going to learn. Some of these sugiyot, it's not so clear-cut exactly what they mean, and sometimes you just have to live with that. I know people like to always understand everything exactly, and sometimes there isn't exact clarity about what exactly was meant here. So now there was a case in Chashla Rav lahad Rav Asi, so he did like Rav Asi. And now they're going to say, Umiyamar Rav Hachi, why would he do like that? It doesn't make sense for that he would do such a thing. That he would say you need 10 when it's Bizmana on the day of. Now, why not? Because it says, this was passed down in the name of Rav himself. Purim shechal liot b'Shabbat, erev Shabbat zmanam. If Purim falls on Shabbat, and then you move it earlier, a day earlier, like we said, that might be the case here, right? You move it a day earlier. Then, according to Rav, you would need a minyan. Because again, Rav would think you need a minyan, right? And Megillah is the main thing he disagrees about is when Megillah is in its proper time, right? I'm sorry, when it's not in its proper time. When it's not in its proper time, just confused for 1 second. Megillah b'zmana, you can read it as an individual. Only when it's shelo b'zmana do you have to read it with 10. So, but the issue, I got confused for a minute. The main issue is where he disagrees with Rav Asi is in its proper time, you can read it as an individual. And then it says, but there was a case where he did like Rav Asi and he required a minyan. So now we're going to see why that's difficult. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rosh Hashanah, the name of Rav, if Purim is on Shabbat, Erev Shabbat Zmanam. Erev Shabbat becomes, this is going to be a line that it's really not clear what it means. And the Gemara is going to grapple with it. We're going to have 2 sentences today in today's daf, where they're going to bring a sentence. They're going to say, we think it means this, which is going to create a question. And then they're going to say, oh, no, it didn't mean that. It meant something else. And then we're going to resolve it. Okay. So right now, what do we think? Erev Shabbat Zmanam. First of all, this doesn't make sense, this whole sentence. Forget about before we get to how it's difficult. But if Purim falls on Shabbat, then Erev Shabbat is its proper time. Now, Erev Shabbat is not its proper time. Erev Shabbat Zmanam, v'ha Shabbat Zmanam. Shabbat is its proper time. What does it mean, proper time? Proper time means Yud Daled, the 14th of the month. So if you say when the 14th falls on Saturday, then the 13th is, it's kind of like saying the 13th is the 14th. The 13th is definitely not the 14th because the 13th is the 13th. And Zmanam, its proper time is the 14th. So it must mean, and this is going to create our problem on Rav, Elalav Hachi Kamar, Shelo Bizmanam Kizmanam. We're going to say that when it's not in its proper time, it's just like when it is in its proper time. Mazmanam afilu biyachid, af shelo bizmanam afilu biyachid. Sorry, now I have it more clear than before. I was a little confused. The issue here is that what he's saying is, it sounds like shelo bizmanam is like zmanam, and just like zmanam can be done on an individual basis, right? You can read it on your own. Or you don't need 10 people anyway, even someone else could read for you, but you don't need 10 people. Even zmanam, even shelo bizmanam would be like that as well, which means that if you were to make Purim on Friday, you'd be allowed to read it in an individual basis. Now that goes against what Rav said in the first place. Rav said only when it's in its proper day, but not when it's not in its proper day, then you can't read it as an individual. And this seems to say you could even read it as an individual. So the Gemara says, no, don't worry about that. That you misunderstood. You thought that when it said Purim shechal liot b'Shabbat, Erev Shabbat Zmanam, was referring to the issue of does it need 10 people or does it not need 10 people? That wasn't the topic at all. When Rav said that statement, he was referring to something entirely different that has nothing to do with what we're discussing right now. Elamai Erev Shabbat Zmanam, lafuki miderebi. It's to differentiate it from Rebbe. Ta'amar Rebbe, this goes back to what we saw on yesterday's daf, at the end of yesterday's daf. Remember, we saw Rebbe and Rabbi Yossi. What did Rebbe say? And our Mishnah and Rabbi Yossi, right? Ho'il v'nitchu ayarot mimkomam, yidachu liyom ha'knisa. Once when the 14th falls on Shabbat, once we're already moving it, and it's not going to be in its proper time anyway, we're not going to move it to Friday. We're going to move it to Thursday, remember? And then we can have the Mukaf Choma on Friday, and then they can be in different days. And they can be, right, the ayarot will be before the Mukaf Choma, and that's a perfect solution, at least according to that opinion. So that's what it means. It means that when Rav was saying, okay, again, let's go back to the words. Purim shechal liot b'Shabbat, Erev Shabbat Zmanam, what he meant to say is the day we celebrate Purim on that year is Friday, not Thursday, like Rebbe thought. And therefore, Hakamashma, the Erev Shabbat Zmanam, and this has absolutely nothing to do with our topic. We're left with back to the original Rav's opinion that Megillah b'zmana korino ta'afilu b'yachid and shelo b'zmana ba'asara. And even though he did this action like Rav Asi, in the end, we hold like Rav's opinion. And this is why I'm sure many of you have been in this situation or possibly in this situation where you couldn't go to shul and you read the Megillah at home, right? And either someone read for you, you read it. Normally, we say you're supposed to have it with the cloth and with the trup and all that. But you can do it without a tzibur of people, without a community of people. And in fact, if you look at Tosfot, I just want to read an interesting Tosfot and teach you a little something small about how we paskin halacha from a Gemara. So first they say, even though, okay, this is on the Tosfot where it starts off, there was a case where Rav did like Rav Asi and he made sure there was a minyan. So they say, even though he did that, we still hold like Rav. On what basis do they say that? Because theoretically, you would see from the simple reading of this Gemara that even Rav held like Rav Asi, and therefore we should insist on a minyan, whether it's bismana or whether it's shalom bismana. To which the Gemara said, the Tosfot says, first of all, we see that Rabbi Yochanan in the second parak on Daf Yutet, we're going to get there, based on a different sugya. Okay, when we get there, we'll try to remember that we saw the Tosfot here. Based on Rabbi Yochanan's approach there, it seems like Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rav, and we generally hold like Rabbi Yochanan, and therefore, even when Rabbi Yochanan and Rav disagree, we hold like Rabbi Yochanan. So either it's because we hold like Rav, or because even if Rav ended up disagreeing, Rabbi Yochanan holds that way. So therefore, and we hold like Rabbi Yochanan over Rav. So all these rules about who we paskin like over who. But then the more important, interesting point that I wanted to bring up is the second half of Tosfot. Then he quotes Rabbeinu Yosef Ish Yerushalayim Pasak. Now he raises this issue that maybe you would think if you do it as an individual, maybe you don't make a bracha. So he says, no, even an individual needs to make a bracha. Okay. Now he says, from where do we prove this? He says, first of all, what's the difference, right? Okay. But he says that if you look at the last line, ita, 3 lines from the bottom, she'ein ba bracha b'yachid, havalei leperushe, my mevarech damar b'tzibur. The sugya should have addressed the issue. If the sugya says that you can do it even as an individual, you can read the Megillah, but without a bracha, it should have said that. So what's interesting here is we can paskin halacha from what isn't said in the Gemara. We can say the fact that the Gemara didn't address the issue of a bracha must mean that a bracha said just like if you were in a tzibur. So that's also very interesting in terms of methodology about how you take the Gemara and you come to a halacha conclusion. Okay, going back to our Gemara now. Mishnah. We're now in a new Mishnah, and we're going to see a few different topics in this Mishnah. Okay, so by the way, I see Medina, you're asking, why wouldn't you say a bracha? I assume you would think that you wouldn't say a bracha because the whole thing is Persume Nisa, and maybe there's not much of a Persume Nisa when you're doing it by yourself. So maybe the reason for the bracha is to publicize the miracle. And since you're not publicizing the miracle, again, anytime you don't have 10 people, it's not considered publicizing the miracle. So maybe you wouldn't do it. By the way, it's a good question. Why you need publicizing of a miracle in Purim and not on Hanukkah, right? Nobody says you need a minyan for lighting candles on Hanukkah. That's interesting, right? This is obviously somewhat a little bit different. Again, these are all very interesting issues. We're not going to have time to get into all of that. So now we have this whole thing, Yud Aleph, you bet you're giving Yud, right? And the difference between a kfar and an ir gdola. So what makes something an ir gdola? So ezu hi ir gdola, kol sheyesh ba'asara batlanim. Anything that has 10 batlanim. So I'm sorry, I'm reading the chat while I'm teaching. I see that Gita, you wrote that it's true you have to light your candles in a place where people see. However, there are situations where you can't. Right. I remember one time we went skiing and we were in a place where there was absolutely nobody around. There was a driveway to get to the place where we were staying. Nobody could possibly see our candles. But in that case, you're pursuing Nisa within your family. Now, your family is not at Tzibur. So you see the criteria are different. Okay. You can still light in that situation, even if no one's going to see. Okay. Right. As long as someone can see, as long as there's someone in the family. Again, I don't remember the halacha. What if absolutely no one can see? Do you still make a bracha? I forget. Okay, going back to the Mishnah. So what's a big city? We go back to this asara batlanim. If there's 10 people who, again, it's not so clear what they are. The Gemara is going to explain from a bright that it's people sitting in a shul, but there are some opinions that it's people who don't work, but their job is, right, it's funny to call them not working, but their job is that they're in charge of the community, right? Community leaders sometimes do more work than the average worker. It's a little bit strange that they call them batlanim because batlanim has a negative connotation. Maybe it didn't to them, what might sound negative to us, maybe didn't sound negative to them because it definitely doesn't sound like a negative thing. So it's a city that has basically, we'll go with the way the Gemara is going to explain it, 10 people sitting in the Beit Knesset, kind of like all day. It reminds me of a shtibel where there's always people there, right? You could get a minyan almost any time of day, other than I guess the times where there's really no chiyuv of davening, but you can really get minyan in there all the time, but it's not the same as that because that's different people coming in. Here there seems to be some concept, I guess it existed then, where people would sit in the shul all day long. If you have any less than that, that's already a small city. right? You could call it a kollel, it's possible, but it doesn't seem to be learning, but maybe. Now, okay, this seems to be referring back to the beginning, the first Mishnah. On these days, right? All this issue of the kfar, the ear, all that, you can be, if there's some issue, whether it's that that you can't get to the city on that day, or whether it's that it's Shabbat and you have to change the day. We're always makdimim v'lo ma'achrim. We never do it later. We always go earlier. Why are they pointing this out? Because now they're going to give you all sorts of situations where it's the reverse. You push it off a day. Aval zman atzei kohanim, if you learn Tani, you know what this is, that there were kohanim, families of kohanim that would volunteer to bring the wood for the ma'aracha. Okay, not just kohanim, actually. It's the zman, it seemed for the kohanim. Some were, right, all sorts of, there were families from Yehudah that brought them. They would bring, and it was a holiday for them, and they would bring the wood to the temple on that day. What if it comes out on Shabbat? You can't do that on Shabbat. Tisha b'av, which you can't fast on Shabbat. And chagiga, the korban chagiga is a sacrifice that they would bring on the holidays. It was a korban shlamim. We're going to get into all the details of this. So I'll give you some intro. It was a peace offering. That means you eat it on the day that you bring it. You eat the meat. Okay. And you could also eat the next day, but it was meant for the owners to eat the meat rather than a korban ola, which entirely gets burnt. Okay. That's a chagiga. Now you're supposed to bring a chagiga on the first day of the holiday. Okay. Even though it's yantif, you can bring it because you're eating the meat. So of course it's allowed. And it's a korban for the sake of the holiday. If you don't bring it on the first day, you can bring it throughout the holiday. That's what we call tashlumin. It's makeup. You have makeup days in which you can do it. Okay, and we'll get to even Shavuot. That's only one day. You still get makeup days of the first. You get the 7 days, including Shavuot, to bring the sacrifice, just like you would on a different holiday. And so, but you can't bring it on Shabbat. You can bring it on Yantif, but you can't bring it on Shabbat. Hakel is when they gathered the people together to read from the Torah. You wouldn't do that on Shabbat either. So if the day of Hakel comes out, you have to push it off. It's on Shabbat. That was what they would do on Shavuot every 7 years at the end of the Shemitah year. I'm sorry, on Sukkot. Did I say Shavuot? I meant Sukkot. They would do it on Sukkot. So all those days when they come out, you push it off. Okay, we're going to see in the Gemara why those get earlier and those go pushed off later. Even though, going back now to Purim, even though we might read the Megillah early on a particular year, but mutarim behespedu b'tanidu umatanot levyoni. These are two separate things. Those days that you read the Megillah, let's say you read it on Yud Bet, you are allowed to fast and eulogize all those things about the happy days of Purim and the happy nature of the day. That doesn't apply when you read the Megillah early, because that's not the holiday. Okay, you're just reading the Megillah, but it's not the holiday. However, Matanot Levyonim, you can, and most people read this as you can, not that you have to, but you can give your Matanot Levyonim on that earlier day. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Right. Obviously, if it's Friday, because it was supposed to be Shabbat, then you would have to give Matanot Levyonim because you couldn't give it on the next day. But if it's that you live in a village and you went to the big city, you don't necessarily have to give your Matanot Levyonim that day, but you could. And we saw the connection of that yesterday. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, this is a line we actually quoted previously in the Gemara. Matai, when is all this true? That on these days of the villages, right, the villagers would be able to read it earlier. Only it's only if they normally go to the town, to the big city on Monday, Thursday. But if you don't go to the city on those days, then you just read on the normal day. It's only applicable if it's a place where that's what you do. The Gemara is going to start with what I told you to find the Asara Batlanim. Tana Asara Batlanim Shebebeit HaKnesset. Okay, so now they say, what are 10 batlanim? They're the people who are in the shul. Okay, notice they don't say Beit Midrash. Okay, for those who say Kolel, I'm not sure, right? The Beit Knesset isn't always associated with the Beit Midrash. My time. What's the reason why we go earlier? So this is very simply from a drasha on the pasuk. Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Shmuel, Amar Kra, V'lo Ya'avor. It says you should. They accepted it upon themselves, va'al zaram, and on their children, va'al kol hanevim alehem, and everybody with them. Below ya'avor liot osim et yimei shnei yamim ha'elu, and you will not go beyond this. Okay, again, lo ya'avor, the pshat doesn't really mean this, but it means you can't go beyond these days for the 2 days, right, of Purim. So therefore, you can't pass it. Now, since Rabbi Abba said this in the name of Shmuel, we're now going to bring another statement that Rabbi Abba said in the name of Shmuel, and then another statement that just Rabbi Abba said. And they seem somewhat unconnected. If you want to try to make a connection, you can. I didn't see a very strong connection, but maybe just because we're talking about days and all that kind of thing. But in any case, let's just read these two halachot, and then we'll move back to our topic. Amar Rabbi Abba Amar Shmuel, minayin she'emonim yamim l'shanim. How do you know that you don't count days when you're talking about a year? Okay, there's days. Okay, we'll talk soon. Hours, days, months, years. You always go from one to the other, and you don't skip one. So what does that mean? If we're talking about a year, Rashi explains, let's say I vow for a year, I'm not going to do something. So what does a year mean? Does a year mean, which is interesting because you would think that this certainly wouldn't mean it, but Rashi suggests maybe a year means 365 days. Why would you think for sure it doesn't mean that? Because our calendar follows the lunar calendar, not the solar. However, even those who follow the lunar calendar, right, is connected with the solar calendar, and maybe you really meant 365 days because maybe you live in a place where that's what people call a year. So when we say a year, we don't mean days, right? Also, sometimes a year, let's say this lunar year is normally 354 days, but once in a while, the calendar has it, an extra month is a Malay month, is a full month, and you end up with 356 days, 55 days, or maybe 353 days, one day less. So there's things that get played around with, and let's say it's one day less, one day more. What do you go by? You go by the calendar, by the months. A year means 12 months, or if it's a leap year, it means 13 months, but it doesn't mean by days. You don't count days. It doesn't go by whatever. It doesn't, like, let's say it was 353 days in the year. It would go by the 353 days, and it wouldn't go by the average year, which is 354 days. Okay. Or we wouldn't count it by the solar year. Okay. So that's what it's trying to say here. How do we know this? This is the pasuk in the beginning of Shemot in Yubet, where it says, this month will be for you. Rosh Chodeshim, Chodesh Nisan, Rishonu lachem l'chodshei hashana will be the first for you for the months of the year. When you talk about a year, you relate to it in months. You don't relate to it in days. You count months to the year. You don't count days to the year. The Rabbanit, the rabbis in Caesarea, in the name of Rabbi Abba, again, the same Rabbi Abba said the same thing about we said we jumped from before days to years. You don't jump and skip the months. And when it comes to hours to month, you don't count the month by hours. Okay, that's what he's going to say. You count it by days. Let's say I say for a month now, I'm not going to do something, and it's middle of the day. Does it mean a month from now, from the middle of the day? This sounds like how you count quarantine, right? I just had this problem. I flew to America and I came back. They changed the rules while I was there. Some of my kids had to change their flight. They had something going on Sunday, and we were flying back on Wednesday night, and they said 72 hours. And by the time we got back to the country, they changed it. Oh, it wasn't 72 hours. It was really 3 days, which includes, Mitzad Yom Kikulo, part of the day you came, part of the day you left. And then really, they actually didn't have to change their flights, which was kind of annoying, right? But you see exactly this issue. How do you count? Do you count things by days or by hours? It's exactly the issue. So now they say, Shneimar ad chodesh yamim, yamim etam chashev. So this was with the Slav. Remember, they got it going out of their ears. God punished them for 30 days in the desert. Yamim, so it says chodesh yamim, days relating to months. So yamim etam chashev l'chodeshim, v'yeh etam chashev sha'ot l'chodeshim. It all goes by days when you're counting a month. It doesn't go by hours. When it comes to a month, it makes a lot of sense. It's like a whole month away. Who's going to remember hours, right? You remember days, not hours. It would be strange to count hours. Ava. Now moving back to the other part of the Mishnah, which was the foil to Purim, is all these other days that instead of pushing them earlier, we push them later. Tisha B'Av, they kind of ignore the Atzei Kohanim. I don't know why, but Tisha B'Av, Akdume Puranut Lo Mikteme. Tisha B'Av, very simply, we don't want to bring in the bad stuff any earlier. We want to push it off, right? You don't want to bring in bad any earlier, so push it off a day rather than making it earlier. I have 2 things to say this. Number one, I don't know, in my mind, when we're in the 9 days, I'm so happy to get rid of them. I would think maybe you're better off getting rid of them and not, waiting. But another reason, which it doesn't say here, but I would think would be an obvious reason, is we saw the whole Gemara in Ta'anit that the real date was the 10th. So if it's between the 9th, right, the 9th, you can't do it because it's Shabbat. It's either the 8th or the 10th. It would make much more sense to do it on the 10th rather than the 8th, because really the burning happened on the 10th. I don't know why the Gemara doesn't say that, but they give a different answer. Chagiga v'Hakel. Why these two? It's not yet the time of obligation, right? Whereas Megillah, we had this idea that there was this concept that we could do it earlier, but here it's not yet the time of the obligation. So therefore, we have to push it off. So now, right, because it's not even the holiday yet. Tana chagiga v'chozman chagiga ma'achrim. We're now going to have our second line in the Gemara today that I told you it's very unclear what this means. We have several interpretations. So it says chagiga, that me'achrim, okay, that's easy. Chagiga gets pushed off. But then it says v'kol zman chagiga, and all the time of chagiga, right, we push off later. What on earth does that mean? Kol zman chagiga. So the Gemara says, Bishlama, we understand very easily chagiga, first part of the sentence. Di mikla b'shabta, what does it mean? If it falls out on Shabbat, ma'achrin alabatar shabta. You do it the next day, very simply. Ela zman chagiga ma'i. But what is this term, zman chagiga ma'achrin? The time of the chagiga we push off. So we're going to have several interpretations. Start with Rav Oshaya. Amar Rav Oshaya, hachi kama. Chagiga b'shabbat, ve'olat re'iyah afilu b'yom tov. Okay. Zman chagiga doesn't mean zman chagiga. Zman chagiga is talking about, I told you, there's korbanot chagiga, shlamim that you bring, that the owners eat. And then there's offerings that you bring, olat re'iyah, from you're supposed to go to the temple, lir'ot et pnei Hashem, to see the face of God, and you bring with you these sacrifices for God, which entirely get burnt on the altar. Those you're not allowed to do on Yantif. Why can't you do them on Yantif? We're going to see in a minute that it's only Beit Shammai who says you can't do them. Beit Hillel says you can. You might remember this from Beitza. If not, this is good review. Or if you didn't learn it, then you'll learn it now, which is that there's a big machlok at Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, whether you can do these korbanot olah on Shabbos. Let's say Yantif falls out on Shabbat. So according to, on Yantif, my mistake. On Shabbat, for sure, you can't do them. The question is, can you do them on Yom Tov? Okay, the Chagiga, also you can't do on Shabbat. Nothing can be, those sacrifices don't override Shabbat. Other ones like the Korban Tamid override Shabbat. These don't. These are additional offerings. So because they're additional, you don't need them. You do bring the regular Musaf offerings of that day. That's something else. But what about on Yantif? So the Chagiga, even Beit Shammai holds you can bring the Chagiga on Yantif. Why? Because you eat it. So it's part of Ochel Nefesh, right? What's the problem with you slaughter the animal, right. Thank you, Gita, for pointing that out. That I didn't say, which is the difference between these and the Musaf offerings on the holidays, that the Musaf offerings are communal. These are individual offerings. That's why they don't override Shabbat. So now they say here, Beit Shammai says the Ola, which entirely gets burned and you're not eating it, there's no Ochel Nefesh involved. There's no food related. You're not eating it. So you can't do that on Yantif. So comes this to say, okay, let's read the line again. So Chagiga me'achrin. If the Chagiga falls on Shabbat, right, the first day of Yantif falls on Shabbat, you push it off because you can't do that on Shabbat. If the first day is Yantif, of course you can, because Chagiga you're allowed to do on Yantif. But Olat Re'iyah afilu b'Yom Tov. But Olat Re'iyah, even if it falls on Yom Tov, now here come the key words, Dizman Chagiga, even though it's a time, and this is why it's called Zman Chagiga, even though it's a time that you're allowed to bring a Korban Chagiga, because it's Yantif, Me'achrin, you can't bring the Olat Re'iyah. And then the Gemara says, Mane, according to who is this? It's Beit Shammai, it's not, as it says in the Mishnah in Beitza, Beit Shammai, Omrim, Mivi'im Shlamim B'Yom Tov, Ve'ein Somchim Alehem, Aval Lo Olot. Beit Shammai says you can bring the Korban Shlamim, the peace offerings, but you can't lean on them. That's all separate issue. We're not going to get into that. But Lo Olot, you can't bring Korbanot Olah because there's no food related to it. Ubeit Hillel Omrim, Hillel says, what are you talking about? Mivi'im Shlamim, Ve'olot, V'Somchim Alehem. These korbanot are sacrifices for the holiday. Even on Shabbat, you're allowed to do all of them. So basically, going back to this line, when it says Chagiga v'chol zman chagiga ma'achrin, kol zman chagiga is a catchphrase. It's almost like it's alluding to Ola Re'iyah on a day where you're allowed to bring Chagiga when it falls on Shabbat. When it falls on Yom Tov. Because Yom Tov, I hope I didn't say this the wrong way before. Chagiga you can bring on Yom Tov. So it's man Chagiga is when it's on Yom Tov. And when the Ola Re'iyah falls on Yom Tov, meaning the first day of Yantif, you cannot bring them. And that's Beit Shammai's opinion. It's a very not short reading of that line. Okay. It's definitely not when you read that line, you really didn't think it was talking about Ola Re'iyah because all it was talking about was Chagiga. But that's a creative way of understanding what it means because they couldn't understand it otherwise. That's Rav Oshaya. But Rava and Rav Ashi are going to bring two other explanations, which are a little more realistic. However, they're both going to understand that it's not Chagiga and something else, the way it sounds, but it's describing, okay, we're going to see how it works. Let's see. Rav Amar, Chagiga, Chagiga, kol zman chagiga ma'achrin. Not chagiga and something else called kol zman chagiga, which the first interpretation said is ola re'iyah. No, chagiga, how long can you push it off? Kol zman chagiga. The second part is defining how long you can push it off for. The whole time that the chagiga is relevant, which means what? The whole holiday. Okay, tfei lo, but no more than that. Ditnan, as we said, and this is what we call the laws of tashlumin, of making up things that you missed. Aval haregel, I skipped. Ditnan, mishalo chag b'yom tov harishon shel chag. If you didn't bring the chagiga on the first day, chogeg v'holechet kol haregel kulo. You have the entire holiday to bring it. B'yom tov ha'acharon shel chag. You even get Shmini Atzeret, the last day of past Sukkot. Aval haregel v'lo chag. But if the holiday ends and you haven't done it, you don't need to make it up, and really you can't make it up. Rav Ashi, so chagiga, kol zman chagiga means how long do you have to push it off? It's defining how long you have to push it off, not another case. Okay, like the first guy thought. Rav Ashi amar chagiga v'kol zman chagiga ma'achrin va'afilu atzeret techad yoma ma'achrin. He says this isn't talking about general laws of tashlumin of makeup. It's talking about specifically on Shavuot. It's teaching you. Chagiga, b'chol zman chagiga ma'achrin. Even the whole time that you could bring a korban chagiga on a different holiday, you would get that same time for Shavuot. So if on Pesach you have 7 days to do it, you also have 7 days on Shavuot, even though Shavuot is only a one-day holiday. Titnan modim, they agree, she'im chal atzeret li'op Shabbat, she'yom tevoach achar Shabbat. They all agree that if atzeret was on Shabbat, which atzeret is Shavuot, that you would slaughter it after Shabbat, meaning it doesn't override Shabbat, and you would then basically push it off, right? Everyone agrees it doesn't override Shabbat, but you could do it on a day that's not actually even the holiday. That's what he thinks kol zman chagiga is coming to include, and therefore we have those three different options of how to read that line. Okay, now going back, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina, not going back, but now we're talking about some other issue related to Purim. And what we're going to talk now is about, is it forbidden to do work on Purim? And they're going to bring three customs of Rebbe and question some of them. Rebbe did some strange things, according to Rabbi Elazar. Rebbe natan etiyah b'purim. He planted something on Purim, which you're not supposed to do, we'll see. Rachatz b'krona shel tzipori b'shivasar b'tamuz. Okay, on a fast day, he went and bathed in public to show that it's not forbidden to bathe in public, to bathe on that day. Ubikesh la'akor Tisha B'Av v'lo hodu lo. He wanted to uproot Tisha B'Av, and they wouldn't allow him. What does it mean to uproot Tisha B'Av? It's a good question. Debate, does it mean uproot the severity of it? Nobody really thinks he wanted to uproot Tisha B'Av in general, but maybe instead of it being a fast that starts at night and it's forbidden in all these things, maybe it's just forbidden for eating and drinking. Maybe it's a little unclear what he wanted to do. And we're going to see in a minute that there's a different version, and he didn't actually really want to uproot Tisha B'Av, but something a little different. Amar lefanav Rabbi Abba bar Zavda, he comes to Rabbi Elazar and says to him, Rabbi, lo kach haya ma'aseh, you have the story wrong, right? How often do we know the stories of all these rabbis or any kind of person? There's people tell stories about them, and someone says, "Oh, you got the facts wrong. That was not the situation." Says this was the situation. Ela Tisha B'Av shechal liyot b'Shabbat. It was Tisha B'Av that fell out on Shabbat. And this is why we brought it up here, because it has to do with pushing off Tisha B'Av to the day after. And what did Rebbe say, according to my version of the story? Since it was pushed off, let's just push it off entirely. Again, what does it mean push it off entirely? But maybe saying, since this isn't the real day, we can be more lenient about its laws. Okay, there's a big question exactly what this means, but yes, this is, okay, I'm going to leave the questions aside here, but there was something that Rebbe did that he wanted to be more lenient. It sort of doesn't matter, is what they're saying, because the rabbis wouldn't allow this at all. Okay, I see there's a discussion going on about Tachanun on the days after Shavuot, and that's 100% connected to this Tashlumin. We've talked about it in the past. And because you can make up and do the sacrifices, it's still somewhat considered part of the holiday, and you wouldn't say Tachanun on those days. Okay, so now, and yes, by the way, there are people who claim that when Tisha B'Av is pushed off and it's not on its actual day, there are certain leniencies to be done here, but he sounded like he really wanted to push it off entirely and say, listen, we missed the day, maybe we don't have to do it at all this year, which again is a bit strange. And the rabbis obviously didn't agree with this. Kare Ale, when Rabbi Elazar heard this correction that Rabbi Abba made, right? There's two ways you can respond, either saying, I disagree with you, I'm standing strong in my opinion, or what he actually does, which is Kare Ale, Tovim Ashnayim Min Echad. It's a pasuk from Kohelet, right? Better two than one, right? I must have made a mistake, and good that you corrected me on it. So two people is always better, right? Sometimes, it's hard to, people trust you on what you're saying, and sometimes you might make a mistake. It's always good when you have someone else to correct you. The Rebbe, now they have another question on Rebbe. How did he plant on Purim? Didn't Rav Yosef teach? It says in the Megillah, okay, the people in Yudala, the year after the miracle happened, the people who were in the unwalled cities started celebrating Purim. And what did they do? They did Simcha, Mishteh Yom Tov. What is Simcha? What is Mishteh? What is Yom Tov? Simcha, this is the Braita that Rabbi Yosef brought. Melamed Shasurim Behesped. Happiness means no eulogies. Mishteh, that means eating. Melamed Shasur B'Tanit, you can't fast. Yom Tov, Melamed Shasur B'Siyat Melacha. We all know Yom Tov. What does Yom Tov mean? It means you can't do work. So from there, you see, it's forbidden to do malacha. So how did he plant? So now we're going to have a few different options about how he planted. Ella, Rebbe Bar Arbe Sarhava, he must have been supposed to do Purim on the 14th. And when he planted it, it was the 15th. It wasn't his Purim, and that's why he did it. To which the Gemara says, Ini, is that really true? Rebbe B'Tveria Hava, and we're going to get all into Tveria later. Rebbe lived in Tveria. In Tveria, it had a wall in the time of Yoshua ben Nun. So it can't possibly be if Rebbe lived in Tveria that he kept Purim on the 14th. So they say, okay, fine, just switch it around. Just say the opposite. El Rebbe, he read the Megillah on the 15th. When he planted, okay, he must have done it on the 14th. To which the Gemara asks the question. Is it obvious that Tveria is a walled city in the time of Yoshua ben Nun? Didn't Chizkiah read in Tveria on the 14th and the 15th? He didn't know, and we're going to see later in today's stuff, why he was concerned about this. Okay, we'll see this in another 2-3 minutes. So how could Rebbe have done it only on one day and not the other? So the answer very simply, you could say Chizkiah had a doubt about it, but Rebbe, he was very confident in the halacha, and he thought it was on the 15th and not the 14th, and therefore that must be what he was doing. But wait, just because it's obvious which day of Purim it is, does that mean that you can do work on the other day? This was a book that listed, we learned about this in Masechet Ta'anit, that listed all these days that one is not allowed to fast or eulogize people because they're happy days. It says, at Yom Arba'asar, at Yom Chamishasar, Yomi Puraya Inun, these are days of Purim, to Lola Misbibahon, you can't eulogize on them. Okay, that so far doesn't say anything about Malacha, but what does Rava say? Amarava, why does it say this? Lo nitzracha. And this is needed. It's to teach that whatever is forbidden in one is forbidden for the other. So therefore, it sounds like if one is forbidden to do work, then the other is also forbidden to do work. So they say, no. When Rava said that, he meant he meant forbidden in eulogizing and fasting. He didn't mean forbidden in malacha. No. So really, you could do malacha on the other day. Malacha is only forbidden on one day and not both days. So now the Gemara says, wait. And it's a bit of a strange question because you're expecting to see a question where it's obvious somebody did something on the day that wasn't his Purim. Okay, and we'll see what happens. But one second. Right. It's going to be a situation where it seems it's forbidden to do it on both days, but the story really doesn't say that. And that's in the end what the Gemara is going to say. You have to wonder why the Gemara thought by bringing this that it was going to prove its point, even though it really doesn't. It's a good question. The commentaries give some options, but I'll just kind of raise it as a question here. Ini, is that really true? Rav saw somebody planting flax on Purim, and he cursed him, and it didn't grow. So they seem to think from here that it's forbidden on both days. Again, unclear why they think that. Some people say because he cursed him, he was trying to strengthen something that really needed strengthening, which would be the Isser Malacha on a day that's not actually Purim. That's like one that I saw was maybe a possibility. But anyway, the Gemara says, no, Hatam Bar Yomi have it. No, the story happened on the day of Purim, not on the other day. So it doesn't prove anything. That was our first answer. Rebbe, why did he do it? Because it was the other day. Okay, now, next. Now we have a different answer. Rabba Berei de Rava Amal, Afilu Tema B'Yomi. Maybe you'd say it was his day of Purim. Why did he do it? We're going to have two different answers now to explain this. Hespei v'tani kabilu alayu malacha lo kabilu alayu. They didn't accept Isra Malacha. They only accepted, right, not to eulogize, not to fast, but not to do Malacha. How does he prove it? He proves it from the Megillah. In the Megillah, that first year, the people in the Prazim on their own did Simcha Mishteva Yom Tov. But in the end, when Mordechai sets these as days for the future for everybody to keep, it says La'asot otam yemei mishteva simcha. Notice what word is missing. Ilu Yom Tov lo ktiv. Again, we're going to learn from what's missing, right? Like we did at the beginning of the daf. Didn't talk about the bracha, so it must be the bracha. Yes. Here it didn't talk about Yom Tov. It must mean wasn't forbidden to do malacha. Ve'ela Rav. So then, if that's the case, my time alatie lahu gavra. Why did Rav curse that person who was planting? So you'd have to say, tavaria amutarim v'acharim nagu b'misur hava. Classic, right? Back to the 4th chapter in Pesachim, makom shenagu. There were people who didn't do malacha on Purim. That guy was living in a city where the custom was not to do malacha, but not that it's forbidden, just for them it is. And if there's things that people do, they forbid it, even though it's permitted to other people. In other words, this is a classic. If you're living in a city where that's your custom, you have to keep your custom. And that's why he got cursed, because he didn't keep with the custom of his people. Rav, who planted, didn't live in a place where they didn't work on Purim. So therefore it was okay. That was answer number 2. Answer number 3. Really, it was forbidden. But he was planting something that was permitted. Since Purim is a day of happiness, you're allowed to plant a tree of happiness. What's a tree of happiness? We saw this also in Ta'anit. If all the fast days pass and you still don't get answered, you start to do all sorts of other things. You do less work. Building and planting. You don't get engaged or married. There's a brighter that explains, binyan, what kind of binyan can't you do? Binyan shel simcha. Nitiyah shel simcha. Okay, a binyan is a happy one and a planting is a happy planting. If you build a house for your son to get married in, these were different things that it wasn't clear exactly what it is, but something having to do with the king, some sort of tree connected, some planting of happiness. And that's what he was doing, because with Purim, he was allowed to do that, even though he can't do other work. Okay, Gufa. Now we're going to get into this tavaria. I see in the chat there were some questions about tavaria. So Gufa. Chizkiah, and we'll continue through tomorrow's daf. Chizkiah Kari b'Tveria, we're going back in depth into something we saw before. This is just a quote right now. Chizkiah read in Tveria on the 14th, on the 15th. So now they say, is it confusing? It's actually very clear. It says, now Tiberias was called Tiberias because of the emperor, right, which was much later. But it obviously was a city that existed before. Now, the question is, we have to identify which city. So now they're going to say, we're going to see different versions, different opinions tomorrow. But right now, we're going to assume Rakat Tveria. Rakat is Tveria. And this is the reason why they were in doubt. So sorry, that was the question. The question is, in Yoshua, it already says it was an Ir Mivtzar. It was a strong city, which means it had a wall. So obviously it was a walled city. So what's the question? So now they say Misapkale, because one side was the water, right? We know that Tveria is on the Kinneret. So then they say, okay, well, if one side's the Kinneret and there's no wall there, well, then obviously it's not a walled city. So I don't get the doubt. Titania, Asher lo choma, how do we know? Here we go to the laws in the Torah where it talks about walled cities for different laws. This is for laws of selling property. The sale of property is different if it's in a walled city, not a walled city. I won't get into the details now, but Asher lo choma, it says it has a wall. There's different rules if it has a wall or doesn't have a wall. For lo shor igel, and not if it has not if it has houses that are all up against each other and the roofs create a wall. No, that doesn't work. Saviv, it says Asher lo choma saviv. What do we learn from the word saviv? Prat l'tveria shechiyama chomata. It has to be all surrounding the city, not like tavaria. Here it says explicitly, tavaria is not a walled city. That's pretty clear. So now the Gemara says, for that issue, there was no doubt. What was the doubt about? Why? Because the issue is different. What's the issue for Mikra Megillah? Here comes the doubt. Why does it say there's a difference between those cities and those cities, the walled and the not walled? Either because Mishum Dahani Migalu, Vahani Lo Migalu, these were revealed and those were not revealed. Now, is Tavaria revealed? Yes, because it doesn't have a wall all around its sides. Vaha Nami Migalia, it was revealed. So because it was revealed, it goes in the category of the unwalled cities. Odilma Mishum Dahani Mignu, Vahani Lo Mignu. Or was it the issue of protected? If it's protected, well, then Tavaria is protected because people can't attack from the water. Maybe nowadays you can with big ships and things like that. But the assumption is then you couldn't really attack from the water. So it was a protected city. So that's the issue. Mishum hachi misapkale, and that's why he didn't know how to treat this city. Okay, last thing for today, Rav Asi, and then we'll get back to Tavaria and tomorrow's stuff. Rav Asi kari Megillah b'chutzal, ba'arbisar ub'chamishasa. Now he has a city in Bavel, Chutzal, which he treated as a suffix. He didn't know. Now, it seems reasonable that in other towns, we don't have a tradition, right? Here we can look to Yoshua, the book of Yoshua. We don't have a list of the cities in Babylonia, but and therefore he was concerned. Now, there must have been some reason for him to be concerned, and the poskim actually say, you don't have to treat any city as, oh, maybe, right? Most cities weren't walled, they claim, and therefore you can assume most cities, right, or did not have walls from the time of Yoshua. However, there must have been some sort of tradition about this city that it was known, and therefore he was in doubt. Some people say no, that Rav Asi wasn't talking about Hutzal and Bavel. He was talking about a city, Hutzal, that was in Israel. Hi Hutzal, debate ben Yamim, Yoshua ben Nuni. And it wasn't that he was in doubt, it was that he was saying this city of Hutzal had a wall in the time of Yoshua, and therefore this city, right? You see that there was all these debates about what cities have walls, don't have walls. How do you figure this out? It's very nice halacha, but the practical application of it obviously got a little bit confusing. Which cities are which? What city, that was then called this, which was a walled city? What is it called nowadays? How do we identify it, etc.? Okay, we'll stop here for today. Have a Shabbat Shalom. And the daf for tomorrow, for Shabbat, will be up within the next hour. Okay, so if you've listened to this, you can go listen to the next one as well. Shabbat Shalom.